I have a special guest today. For the second time, we've interviewed Ken Cousens. And I'll just give you a little bit of background. There's a lot of background on Ken. I do encourage you to visit his website and to learn about, what he's teaching. But in general, I will explain that he is an author, actually, a visionary author. He's a teacher and he's founder of PanTerraVida, a movement that is dedicated to reawakening sovereignty, consciousness, and new structures of law rooted in community, land, and truth. He's also behind Gemstone University, a school for spiritual, legal, and energetic mastery, and the Master Law course, through which he guides people to recover their true status as free sovereign beings. Now, Ken's work combines metaphysics, earth-based wisdom, spiritual alchemy, and legal theory, and he's well versed in all legal aspects, like 35 years of knowledge in one man, proposing that humanity or mankind is undergoing a radical transformation, which I think is very evident, shifting out of imposed systems, especially these sort of slavery-based systems and debt-based systems, toward a living source-based paradigm. And his teachings emphasize reconnecting with the land, dissolving false narratives, and restoring power to the people through shared frameworks of justice, equity, and natural law. And across his writings and training, Ken offers a lot of tools for inner healing and external shift or change, and redesigning governance, cultivating personal sovereignty, which are all grounded in his belief that we're source connected beings and capable of creating a new reality together. So thank you very much, Ken, for being here again. And I'm excited to have another conversation with you.
Great. That was a great introduction. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome. So as mentioned in your intro, in your bio, that, the term sovereignty came up there. And I know for a lot of people who are waking up into where, the reality of these systems that are clearly failing us and failing us by design, how would you define sovereignty for people, or how do you explain that to people? Because it seems to be a bit of a loaded word now. It's a buzzword, and I would like for you to define that for people and what you feel the value of using the term is, because sometimes I shy away from even certain terms anymore because
Yeah.
of it all.
Well, ultimately, the value is to shy away from that term, as you say. But we can look at it at two or three different levels. So to answer that, let's go back to the beginning. My entry into the study of law, that very soon thereafter opened up the study of monetary systems, the fundamental, foundational nature of money, how money is created, all of those kind of things. They're both interrelated. Law and money, or legal and monetary systems, are definitely the flip side of the same coin. They are essentially the code of the matrix. It is what attaches us to the matrix. That attachment is what enables the system, the controllers of the system, to feed off of our source connection, our capacity to embody and hold creational capacity at an eternal level, not a temporal level. We are eternal beings. We are creation itself, as individuated, very unique expressions of how creation fulfills itself or manifests its directive capacity. So in the beginning, in the early 90s, I began studying all of that, studying first the tax code, the IRS code, related law. That led into the study of money. It soon thereafter led into us expanding out into the international arena, studying different jurisdictions, banking, things like that. So as I often say, I was fortunate because I started at that time to have two things. One, to be mentored and taught and guided by the original grandfathers of the law movement, the freedom movement, the sovereignty movement. And at that time in the 90s, everybody, that was the buzzword, sovereignty. It's before the internet, before instant communication and everything that we have today. And that's what everybody was after. I want to be sovereign. We would go back to original acts and documents in the US history of law and the Constitution and the judicial decisions that followed within the first decades of the Constitution. And there was one Supreme Court decision, pretty sure it was Marbury versus Madison, but it basically said that after the revolution, the sovereignty devolved to or rested upon the people. But that was a specific definition. The people, as defined at that time, were the qualified electors, and a qualified elector, which was following the European model and the Roman Holy Empire model, because the Holy Roman Empire was pretty much situated in the German principalities, of which there were about 300 before Germany became a unified country in the 1870s and thereabouts. So all of them were called prince electors. These were princes that had a principality and was not unified as a federated country. And so that was carried over because at the time of the revolution, the crown, George the Third was called and titled the arch treasurer and the prince elector of the Holy Roman Empire and the United States of America. So that model carried over, and it was defined by who is a qualified elector. Well, that was a man who held and stood upon the land and had the qualification of having the law as one who was standing on the land. And this was what was referred to as those to whom or with whom sovereignty was vested after the revolution. Prior to the revolution, obviously, sovereignty was in the crown. But then we go through the 1800s, we go through the Civil War, the post-Civil War, the creation of the municipal corporation called the United States in Georgetown and the city of Washington, now called the District of Columbia, and eventually the 1930s when that United States corporation was put into bankruptcy. So everything that we're going to talk about today as far as what sovereignty is, but that leads into what are the practicalities? What is the reality of our standing and ability to remove the attachments that keep us within the controlled system that we call the matrix, that is primarily the legal and the monetary attachments in bonding. So what I learned as I went through the 90s, the 2000s, and into the 2000 teens was that sovereignty was a misdirection. And you see, the system has used that against many, many people who have only part of the answers, part of the pieces, and they've gone around and saying, well, I'm a sovereign. Lots of people have gone into court or dealing with, road stops with police or taxation or whatever. And they have been hung on their own ignorance of how the system really works. The system then used that against the masses of people attempting to move themselves into a freedom or a free status. And therefrom came the term sovereign citizen. Because as citizens in the United States and as subjects in Canada and the rest of the English Commonwealth countries, whether citizen or subject, you are actually attached to property that belongs to the crown in the Commonwealth or belongs to the corporation in the United States. That property is the construction of something that is, people have also misnomered. They call it a straw man. We used to use that term in the 90s and the 2000s, and that's another misdirection. We could get into that later or not, but specifically in precisely the monetizing account that creates the debt on the public system is really a franchise. It's a franchise of a corporation called the United States. There is a corporate subdivision called Canada as a corporate entity that has a central bank that has put that corporation into basically a state of bankruptcy in every other country except for two or three. Canada, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, UK, South Africa, Namibia, every African country, every South American country, et cetera, et cetera. So we operate in commerce in the public through a franchise. We are granted privileges to do that. We have no rights. We have civil rights, but civil rights are essentially, as I'm sure you know, and many watching this, they're just privileges. So until one addresses the issue that we are the bonded surety, which means we have a bonding attachment to all the debt of the franchise, and we are the obligated party. So hence we are controlled not as per se property of the bankrupt corporations, but as obligated bonded sureties to the bankrupt franchise. And hence we are bankrupt. So we can't even talk about freedom or sovereignty in that status. And almost everybody is in that status. We are bonded sureties to a bankrupt franchise of a globally or worldwide deployed and distributed entire bankrupt system. And in law, one has no standing in law, no standing in a court, no standing to bring a claim, no standing to stake a claim, which is how land is claimed. And all of that means we have no status to effect anything in the matrix if we do not comply to all the rules, the codes, the ordinances, the statutes that bind us to the rules of the matrix. So we are very much unfree. We are very much not even remotely close to being a sovereign. And so the real issue in walking a path to take the steps to become free is solvency, because a bankrupt is defined as one who is insolvent, whose liabilities or debt obligations exceed one's capacity to sustain those obligations, and hence must be treated as a bankrupt, and a bankrupt has no standing or status to do anything in law. So this is what I learned in the course of the last 35 years, because in the 90s and the 2000s, I went through all these things. I went through commercial processes. I went through what people thought was the absolute solution called secured party creditor, which relates to the Uniform Commercial Code. The Uniform Commercial Code relates to debtors, secured parties, and collateral that is attached to the obligation of the debt that is owed to the secured party. Another definition of the Uniform Commercial Code is it is a codified system of rules that apply to merchants, mariners, and their property. That then leads us into maritime law, admiralty law, a lot of things that relate to how the entire system creates the bonding that I've just described and attaches us perpetually to all of those obligations.
Yeah, because my understanding in the sovereign de jure language was that's law of the land. That's like meets and bounds more so. And then we
Right.
have the law of the sea, the maritime law, you know. And when we are trying to figure all this out, like many of us have gone through these iterations, we're trying to understand what that means as far as what law pertains to us if we're like, on the land, right? Versus we're like pirates or something. And what is operational or what has happened? Like, has the law of the sea been brought onto the law of the land? And is that even allowed,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know?
So, these are the things that PanTerraVida has been developed over the last 20 to 30 years. Formerly, we formed Pantera. Its original name was Pantera de Oro. Was actually recorded as a public notice in the state of Washington and on February 26, 2002. So technically, Pantera has been formally in existence and cognized within the system since that date, roughly 23 and a half years ago. And we did it very specifically at that time. People I was working with in Washington State had actually gone to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State holds the position of the interface or the liaison between the public commercial side, which is in the domestic zone, and the private equitable side and where law really exists. So in the United States, of course, we have 50 corporate states, but we have essentially 48. Well, that's kind of level and degree. Actually, there were 35 states that existed before the Civil War. So you had 35 original de jure lawful states before everything was corporatized and then put into bankruptcy. Of those 35, of course, there was the original 13. So you have 13 and then 22 added. And then after the Civil War, from that 35, you had another 23 up to 48. When Alaska and Hawaii came into the Union, which was really the corporate environment, the corporate structure, this was past 1933. So they were never a de jure state. You know, Alaska was a lawful purchase from Russia and always was the United States territory, but it was never given statehood. And when it became a state, it only went directly to a corporate state. Hawaii was a sovereign constitutional monarchy that was overthrown illegally by the U.S. military in 1893, and then it stayed in this sort of, controlled protectorate territory until it became a state in 1959. But the point is that everybody that is alive today, with a few exceptions, has always been in the status of a bonded surety to the bankrupt franchise post March 1933. And that's how we have operated. So back to the point of, and I lost my track there, but I'm back on it. I was talking about Washington State. So Washington State became a state in 1889, but it actually came in a unique way. In when it became a state, for 2 days it was a lawful state, a de jure state, as opposed to the other states that came in after the Civil War. 2 days later, it was corporatized and brought into the corporate structure post 1871. Oregon was the last de jure state. It basically came in 1857 as a de jure lawful state, and Oregon and Washington were really part of Columbia, that is now known as British Columbia. And British Columbia, where Columbia actually had a contiguous attachment to the city of Columbia or the District of Columbia. And we don't want to go too far into that, but there's all these things that are never taught. Most people do not have any idea how that was constructed, where the states came from, where the so-called countries came from, because there were certain shenanigans that took place with Canada, for example, where you are, that in supposedly 1867 there was something called the British North American Act, but that was never properly put into law. It was never actually signed by Victoria as the Queen or the sovereign. And there's variations in every country. Australia, New Zealand, we have members down there, and in their research they found that the actual state was the nation state was something that was created offshore in maritime law on an island, and then it was brought in and overlaid over the land. And if you study all the history of the different countries, it's always the same thing. They were always brought in as an overlay, a maritime overlay. Per se did not bring maritime law onto the land because that's like oil and water.
Mhm.
You know, the two can't mix. But there can be an overlay, which has happened over the last 150, 200 years. And through that, and then all the things that happened in the, post-Civil War and 1930s and all of that, they then constructed legal constructs that attached all the people, all the persons, and all the property to the bankrupt structure, the bankrupt state. So when Pantera was formed in 2002, the people I worked with knew all of this about Washington State. They actually had an agreement with the Secretary of State that particular and specific documentary form that was recorded in the Secretary of State's record system would actually be cognized in that system as a non-domestic lawful de jure instrument of acknowledgement by the lawful side of the Secretary of State's office. So that's how Pantera started. And we have built it over the last 23 years since that time. And I was very fortunate to meet some very knowledgeable people who walked me through different pieces of how we constructed PanTerra as a private society. And of course, I continued my education. I learned a lot of things about what I had been given by these mentors and teachers. And progressively, we have built PanTerra as a private society. And in international law, and specifically English law, going back to the City of London, a society is recognized as a lawful jurisdiction for the purpose and intent of individuals. It says men in years past, but we consider all beings, obviously men and women, as the same and equal, and having what I have termed sovereign integrity, not trying to be legally sovereign, but spiritually, multidimensionally, we have sovereign integrity. And so everything that I've constructed has been in alignment with the public law or the international law, but I've been able to identify exactly what basically mirroring the public law, the international law, the law of the elites and the bankers in the Vatican and all of that, so that the PanTerra private society has maintained its privacy, its standing as a sovereign body politic, and essentially as its own jurisdiction with its own court, its law form, and its ability to build other aspects of a sovereign body politic. So we'll get into that later as we discuss it. Because before we started, as you had said, we want to get practical. We want to get down to earth, answer people's questions. So to wrap this whole section up, our goal and purpose is to establish ourselves as solvent, non-bankrupt, also not enemies of the state, which is
Mm.
another construction to make everybody an enemy so that they could be in a state of war, they meaning the corporate structure, the corporate state, and all of that. And these are the things that we built the entire educational foundations and courses and everything we have in GEM University that we've built as the over the umbrella form called Gemstone University. Now our website is gem.university, and we've built on the experience of developing all of the education over the last 30 years, a really concise but very comprehensive system of education with and leading to practical applications for one to truly be free, to be solvent, to have sovereign integrity in a spiritual multidimensional reference point, but not seeking to be a quote unquote sovereign in the matrix. Essentially, we're not of the matrix. We can be in it, but not of it. We can use its tools. We can use its laws and everything that has enslaved us, but we're not of it. We're not bound to it. And that's the secret.
And the ecclesiastical aspect of this is really important. I feel like other societies or groups or movements, they come at things very passionately, maybe with aspects of law, but I never really see this integrative spiritual aspect. And I feel that that's actually the most important to like as a basis, because if you don't know the source, it's really easy for egos, ideologies, and all kinds of other false constructs to be infiltrated into that society. And we have to be really careful about the spiritual law aspects and not to break that spiritual law first and foremost, and to have a way in which to communicate where everyone is kind of on an even playing field. And
That
sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's okay. I interrupted you, but I wanted to stop you there because that is a paramount, vital, and essential point. And this is where Andrea, my partner, co-founder, and wife, of 33 and a half years, this is what has always been our primary and ultimate goal is the spiritual aspect, the transformational aspect, our capacity as true source connected beings who really have created this reality based on been entrained to project the agenda and the movie of the parasite, but for a purpose, which we can talk about a little later as well. But to stay on point with what you just said, that the starting point to understand how law works, both universally and in detail on this planet in all its variations, there are many forms of law. There's canon law, ecclesiastical law, kingdom law, corporate law, commercial law, civil law, et cetera, et cetera. And then ultimately there's natural law. Natural law is balance, it's an equitable relationship with all living things. Those are foundational to universal principles. As source connected creational beings, creation itself is not, as we know, it's not static. It's not like, then God created this realm and that's it, and it's static, and here's the book, and follow the book, and that's it, and don't ask questions. Creation is a continuum. It's an eternal continuum that is not temporal. It's not locked in time. But it has iterations. So one level of iteration is the unique expression of an individuated being. That's you and me and everybody else. We are individuated, we are absolutely unique, but we're also universal. We are one as a universal expression, but we're unique in who we are as our unique expression and individuation. So as I've studied the law over the last 35 years and longer, what I came to understand is you really get into the nitty-gritty of every and all aspect, that the only way that the parasite could create a legal and monetary system of bondage was to get voluntary consent of all those who participate. And it's actually hardwired in the Declaration of Independence, which everybody says is the paramount, you know, instrument of freedom, 1776 and all of that. By and large, it is. But there's a few key things that are hooks in there. Same with the Constitution, same with everything else that they've created, basically Orwellian, that it has a name that sounds great, but it's really got, bonds and hooks and all of that. So that primary line in the Declaration is government by the consent of the governed. Okay, well, that sounds great because, back then, 1770s through the 1790s, they withdrew their consent from the crown and the king and the British system and all of that. But what has been evolved over the last 240, 50 years is setting it up so that we all consent legally by our very actions, starting with our parents from the day we are born and what is constructed that they feel is mandatory. Here, you have to register the baby, you have to get a birth certificate account, vital statistics account, all these things. You have to get a hepatitis B shot, you have to get a social security number, and all of these things. It is presented as mandatory. None of it ultimately is mandatory. Everything is by consent. But once you consent to something and you enter into a contract, because there's another thing in the Constitution in the United States and in all the states' constitutions, which is that no state has the right to impair the obligations of contracts. Well, that can be used very much in our favor, but it is also used every single day against us because we enter into contracts and reiterate or re-consent to those contracts every day of our lives. Every time we use a phone or an electronic item or have a bank account or a utility account or pay taxes or at this point go to the grocery store and get a receipt, these are all contractual attachments or nexus points where we're consenting to the obligation of contracts. When we are a bonded surety to the entire system through the bankrupt franchise, every single code, ordinance, statute, and bill and act from Parliament or Congress establishes contractual connections that we bind ourselves to by the obligations intrinsic or inherent in those contracts. Those contracts require us to abide by all of those codes, rules, statutes, and so forth. So when people say, I want to be free, I want to be sovereign, and if they don't understand how that connection is and how we have established our consent voluntarily using our sovereign free will to enter into those contracts. And everything that we do within the system, when we use their monetary units and we spend Canadian dollars, US dollars, or any of the currencies, we are reaffirming our binding nature to those contracts. And then it's ad infinitum. So to truly walk a path into freedom is to sever the attachments, remove the presumption of consent, and systematically and comprehensively settle all the obligations of those contracts that we've entered into. The other aspects in the monetary level of things is that every single issue on the public side that we're able to be aware of, from a traffic ticket to a fine to a tax bill to a medical event like getting a hepatitis B shot at birth, things like that, they all have a public nature and a private nature. On the private side, bonds are created against those public instruments. So if you have a traffic ticket and a fine, you think you just go, you plead to the court, you pay the fine, and it's done. What most people don't know is bonds are created against that ticket and everything else that has ever happened in our lives and in the public system. Many bonds are created for each event. We have thousands and thousands of bonds that are attached to our franchise and the underlying estate. And even if we're supposedly debt free, we pay our mortgage, we pay it off, we pay all the fines, we pay all of our taxes, we have no debt. People say, well, I'm free because I have no debt. That's only on the public side. What's not recognized is that there's hundreds and thousands of bonds that attach to us, that attach to our status as the bonded surety to those franchise obligations, even if the obligations are paid, the underlying bonds have not been paid. And they run anywhere from 1 year, 3 years, 10 years to 30 years. And they persist after death. And, so one must know what that is, must know how that operates and functions, and how we can sever those attachments and remove the presumption of consent. That's what's basically foundational to our education and our practical steps.
So that means just to clarify, there's a few ways that sovereignty can be achieved. One would be to clear all insolvency of that connection, and the
Yeah, but,
other would,
but let's clarify. Let's not even say we're trying to achieve sovereignty. Okay. We're not trying because we're doing. What we are doing is achieving true freedom. Okay,
yeah,
this is why our new media persona that we set up at the beginning of this year is called Freedom Absolute, because we address it at all levels, the spiritual level, the biological level, the emotional, the psychic, the karmic, and the legal, and the monetary. So we don't even concern ourselves about sovereignty. Okay.
yeah.
What we want to achieve legally and monetarily is solvency, because if we're not attached through bonding to the public system of debt obligations, then we are free. We're free of that. Then we have the expanded capacity to start approaching our inner bondage, our inner imbalance, our inner bonded surety relationship to many, many things that have happened in this world over eons of time, many epochs, many lifetimes, because most people, maybe even pretty much all people watching this conversation, they're spiritually motivated. That's the people that come to listen to us at this point. People know about karma. They know about quote unquote past lives. They know about, different races that have done certain things genetically and creating attachments through genetics and bloodlines and many, many things. We are in a phase now in this reality where all of those things are coming up. We have the ability because we're continually expanding our capacity, embodying our true being and our authentic self, which is bringing with it more expanded capacity to resolve all of those attachments. That's why we call it freedom absolute, because freedom just from legal obligations or monetary debt or whatever it can't be truly free or fully free in this reality because we have so much that we've carried into this lifetime.
Okay, and so like where I was going with that was about the methods because the idea of insolvency was one aspect. Is that tying into the status change?
Yeah.
So that they're one and the same. So status change is not just breaking the contract agreements like with those parties or clarifying them or
So
auditing
yeah,
them,
let's
but
clarify that we don't break them. We sever the attachment. We disattach from those attachments or those bonding. But we see in following the law, both the legal public law, the private law, the universal law, we entered into all contracts, even past situations, and past meaning past lives. And so to stay in honor, because the whole system is a projection, it's a mirroring. The Uniform Commercial Code system is all about honor and dishonor. So, but spiritually or universally, we also have to stay in honor, which means to honor all contracts. That doesn't mean to perpetually be bonded by those contracts. It means to honor, which means to settle, close, and resolve those contracts. We have the capacity to do that. We have the capacity to do it genetically. So if we're dealing with an ancestral lineage or our karmic past lineage where we were raped in previous times by Anunnaki, the sons of the gods came down and took the daughters of men and made them their wives. Well, that's a nice way of saying that the various races that have taken dominance and control in this world came and raped and pillaged. The raping was purposefully done to attach genetics to be able to stay in this planetary realm and essentially do what they've attempted to do as parasites to gain at the end of their agenda perpetual domination, control, and, enslavement. So our genetics, we all have hybridized genetics. Those are literally contracts we must transmute, transform, and resolve as everything is opening up in a multidimensional way in all of our lives and collectively, and as the matrix is imploding on itself, we have more and more capacity to transmute those genetics, resolve them, transform them, and actually honor the contract and settle it and close it. We have other tools, and these are all the things that we do in the PanTerra Society, and we teach people and do these things, walk together and guide people. So in our master law course with the third phase of status correction, and what people will learn in walking the steps of this education, the practical applications of all of it, is how we honor every contract. Because in their system, in the UCC system, you always need to stay in honor. If you go into dishonor, the party that maintains control or stays in honor will always control the outcome. That's why they have you walk into the court and say, Your Honor. You just said he's in honor and you're in dishonor when you call him or her Your Honor. There's many tricks of language and all that kind of stuff. So in the world system, the legal and monetary system, everything is commercial code. Everything is securities. And so we teach everybody how to stay in honor. You always stay in honor. Being in honor is an extremely powerful tool in settling and resolving all contracts. So that when a presentment comes to us, a bill, a charge, a tax, whatever, we don't reject it. We don't remain silent because silence is agreement to their offer of contract. If you stay silent, you take the tax bill and you say that's that's not accurate and you throw it in the trash, you have gone into dishonor by not following the rules. If you reject it and send it back, aka break the contract, you also are in dishonor. So we accept everything. And what my education over 35 years and my refinement of the precise tools to be in the world but not of it, or in the matrix and not of it, is how to stay in honor, how to accept everything, how to utilize our acceptance as a putting us in a superior position in terms of honor in commercial terms, but also control in terms of the equity within every contract, and using that private equity to settle public obligation. So this is what I have perfected in my journey, how to walk through the system and never give them anything to attach to.
So I guess if you ever walk into court, you say, "Hello, my honor."
You could. Part of the secret, once you really are in an advanced stage, is you never walk into their court. Okay. If you have to, you need to know specific and precise language of how to do that, to stay in your private standing, in your private capacity. And there are tools to do that. There are tools of language, tools of how to comport oneself within their system. I have done it numerous times over the last 20 or 30 years. I did not file any tax returns since 1988, but around 2014-15, the IRS caught up with me on a certain thing that was an attachment that had not been settled. It was still a contract in their system that had not been properly settled. Make a long story short, I visited an IRS office 3 times between 2015 and 17, and I established my own standing, my own court, and I reversed everything. I turned them into my trustees, and I basically required them to settle the accounts, which they did. And when the first time they didn't do it properly or timely, I actually reported an IRS officer for tax evasion to the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. And I never heard from him again. In fact, I got visited by 2 special Treasury agents in January of 2016, and they took my criminal complaint against the IRS officer for tax evasion, absconding with public funds, misappropriation of public property, and malfeasance in office. And so that's 10 years ago. And so that was at a point in my progression where I was really getting a true integrated understanding and application of how the law really works. So since then, in the last 10 years, that is greatly expanded through a lot of experience, a lot of working with our members and their situations. And it's very empowering to be able to do that. One of the biggest benefits is it minimizes and eventually reduces, maybe not to absolute zero, but pretty close, the fear factor, that you're not afraid. And that's one of the biggest control elements in this world is fear, as you know, I'm sure. So this is what the knowledge does, the education leading to knowledge, knowledge leading to practical application, walking the process, which eventually leads to a level of spiritual maturity and wisdom integration that really eliminates the fear. That's another level of attachment that we work with.
For clarity, just for people watching, excuse me, the insolvency corrective steps are the same as a status correction
Yeah,
process?
basically. Yeah.
Okay.
Honoring the liabilities of previous contracts against the franchise that we were obligated as the surety guaranteeing those is the secondary phase of status correction. The first phase, you have to take specific steps to, at the same time, honor all contracts, but to stand on the right of rescission based on new understanding, new knowledge, new awareness in your current moment of now that you've added to your being since you entered those contracts, since your parents when you were a newborn put you into the system of vital statistics and commerce and all of that. You never changed that when you were 16 or whenever you got a driver license and you put your signature on an application to become a driver. When you become a driver, you become a driver in commerce. You also then take up the holder position of holder of the office of person, because the franchise is a person, which means a juristic or a legal entity. It's not you, you know that, but many people don't. Many people are being distracted and they say, well, it's the straw man in the secured party process and various other things. And there's a lot of people, which we can get into a little later in the conversation, who are teaching parts of the knowledge, but they don't have the full integrated whole picture. And that can be very dangerous. This is why so many people are confused. So many people want to know, but the internet has just proliferated with all these pieces, a lot of which are not accurate, or they're only partially accurate. So you have to take the various steps to change your status, which is what our status correction is, and we address everything. There's no other so-called status correction process that I'm aware of in this entire world that is as complete and comprehensive of what we do. We address everything. We address the Vatican. We address the baptismal certificates. Doesn't mean you're a Catholic. If you're a Catholic, you have a baptismal certificate with that particular church. You have baptism with Protestant churches, but the birth certificate is actually a baptismal certificate. You were put underwater because the minute they issue they take the record of live birth and they convert it to a registered account that then is converted to a statistic or an account in the statistics system of vital records, and then they issue birth certificates against that. Well, what people call a birth certificate is simply a evidence of a trust. It is a bond. It's a bond against the obligation of that system of vital statistics. It's all underwritten by the underlying estate, which we have effectively abandoned. If you abandon your estate, you have no standing to claim anything in your estate. So you have to go through all those steps. So we address the baptismal attachment, which is paramount because the Roman Church controls all the Protestant church. They control the Islamic structure. They control everything, secular and religious. All these so-called secular systems, you mentioned ecclesiastical earlier, they're all so-called secular, political offices and so forth, whether it's the office of president, the office of mayor of New York City, or every other office. They're all ultimately constructed as ecclesiastical offices. All the courts are ecclesiastical. They are all under the paramount control of what's called the Roman Curia, which means the Roman court. And that's part and parcel with the Holy See. So understanding the ecclesiastical nature of their construct is very important. So we address that in status correction. We claim our estate. We don't refute the baptismal certificate. We actually claim it. We claim our genetics, our blood, bones, flesh, and our living body, our living system. To make a claim gives you standing. And once you declare a status and you properly notify every level of the system, which is part of what we do, and they do not respond because they're bound in the public by the rules of honor and dishonor. When they don't respond and we properly document it, properly write out the documents that we send to them, well, we achieve perfection in our claims because they have gone into dishonor. They rejected our presentment and they basically stood in silence, which means acquiescence. If you know the rules of how to perfect it and take the various steps. Very few people know the rules. Very few, even fewer, know how to take those steps. Because I had the benefit of going through 30 years of going through the commercial processes, going through secured party processes, going through all these steps, I knew how to integrate all of this. And this is what's in our master law course and in our status correction process. So we do all of that and quite a bit more. And because Pantera is a private society that has gained true cognizance in the system, that our court and our law form in our court and our court as a court of record and a permanent archival system of those records, all of these are recorded in each of our members' individual, actually we call it a court of record, of their steps that they take in all of this process. It's taken a vast amount, thousands and thousands of man and woman hours to build this, to course correct, to go through trial and error, all the trial and error that I went through the 90s, 2000s, 2010s. And then we started building this about 12, 13 years ago. And we've gone through layer upon layer of reconstruction, correction, modifying, refining. And where we're at now is a very, very well-tailored, succinct process, steps of education, and then practical implementation. So once you've done the 4 primary steps in the status correction process, now you have the status and the standing to access the underlying equity in your lineal ancestral estate that previously the public system controlled by default. Because when our parents or our mother registered into the system, our parents are the proper lawful holders of the office of executor for the infant's estate, but they abandoned it. And there's law in the English law form that goes all the way back to 1066 when William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, took control of London, established the relationship with the city of London in 1067 and onward, and actually set the whole system up where the entire structure of the City of London, Washington, D.C., the Vatican, the Holy See, all of that we've talked about, is this vast, complex, bureaucratic, legal, political structure that set it up that the political extension of those city states and of parliament and so forth does not have the right to say they own or control the land or the living beings, the people. What they do, what they did set up in their legal construct is that the entire system originating out of the City of London has a legal or geopolitical, legal, and international authority to control the estates of infants. Okay. So when you take on an attorney who is licensed or bar coded, bar carded out of the 4 Inns of Court, out of the City of London, that attorney can only represent an infant, a incompetent, or an imbecile. That's it. So if you have hired an attorney, and we hire attorneys every day, whether we know it or not, even if we're not going to court or have a legal issue to have an attorney, when you're in a county or a province or a state or whatever, everything that the public system does legally, it's all by attorneys. Okay. When you're a resident attached by the bonding into their system, you are basically being torn or represented, torn back into their domestic legal monetary bonding system. So you, by definition, are an infant, you are an imbecile, and you are incompetent. That's how the state treats you. That's how the political system treats you, the whole thing. And legally and in universal law, the whole basis is what we started with, that we have sovereign free will, but the right in that free will to consent to contract. And we have consented to these contracts, and hence they have a legal authority to do what they do. Not a lawful authority, but a legal authority. So it's all about controlling infant estates because we abandoned them and we deferred or defaulted the office of executor, one who can administrate the estate. We've defaulted that to the bureaucratic, legal, political system. So in in status correction, We claim everything that is required. We pull it back in. We establish the lawful court. We establish the court of record. We have a permanent archival system that over the last 15 years, we've progressively been integrating and perfecting. And so that is what gives one that true private standing. That converts the status from bonded surety to a living being with standing on the land and the capacity to assert and claim what we claim and to stake a claim on the land and in law.
And that was leading nicely into my next thought, which is how does one then go about finding the private bonds that, we're talking about the public contracts and clearing those. And then you were saying there's a bond underlying all of those. And
Mhm.
when you're doing this process, when you're helping people understand it, how does that, like, what's the practicality of how do I know where I'm bonded? Like, how do I even figure
Yeah,
out I'm 51. How the heck do I figure out all these mistakes, right? That I've made throughout my entire life and clear up every single one of them. Not like I'm getting presentments about anything currently, but I'm sure there's a bunch of
sure.
them floating around, right? So
Yeah,
how do you pull those in and then clean that up?
good question. First of all, we have to understand, which most of us do, we've been living in an upside down, ass backwards, inside out reality. The law is very clear. The legal system and the construction of the legal system, including everything we've talked about, is also very clear. What's not clear is the rogue nature of the individual beings who have been put in lower hierarchical levels of the system, whether they're the street level IRS or Canada Revenue or Inland Revenue, any of these taxation authorities or provincial taxation courts, magistrates, clerks of court, we could talk for days and weeks if I were to relate to you all the stories that I either personally had to deal with over the last 30 years or with very close friends and associates that I worked with over the decades. And we were all doing these various things and we were learning things and applying them. And the stories of the level of corruption, the glazing over of people who are at the lower levels, the clerks at the window at the county recorder or you name it, or the receptionist at the IRS office and everything. The level of spiritual corruption in these beings is so mind-boggling when you look at somebody eye to eye and you know the law and you tell them what the law is and they just glaze over. And the glazing is cognitive dissonance. Yeah, well, you may know the law, you may try to tell me, but I know the rules in my office. And if you force me to do something, I'm in jeopardy of losing my job or other consequences. The most extreme is at the judicial level. And maybe that's, that's up for grabs. We can flip a coin. The taxation level, the judicial level, the political level, they're all like, you know, and it's gotten more virulent in the last 5 to 10 years. As the parasite, the collective parasite that has parasitically attached itself to this entire holographic containment field that we call life or reality, as it has moved progressively and exponentially towards its endpoint agenda, which we may not talk about in this conversation, but I'll just encapsulate it and just say that, the entire agenda is about harvesting living beings and those who have complied to their rules and harvesting them with the cyclical loop that we've been in for eons of time. And at the end of that loop, there is a quote unquote end times. And at that end times, basically the elite and the controllers know what's coming, which is basically a collapse of the containment field and basically a reset. That's why the word reset has been infiltrated into the common vernacular. We've got global currency reset. We've got WEF, the Great Reset. It's all about the reset. As they were coming to the end point of implementing their whole agenda, which also requires something that's called revelation of the method or hidden in plain sight. Since we are the actual creators of this reality, they are just the parasites. They cannot create. They can only create through parasitic attachment to us, through all these mechanisms that we've talked about and much more. They have to bring everything out into public view because we have to, at subconscious, unconscious levels. When I say we, I'm talking about billions of creator beings or source connected beings and or even, very hybridized beings in their genetics, but still have a spark of, living connection to real life and creation. We have to take it in and then reproject it out to create their matrix, to create their movie, and so forth. And so as the exponential or the parabolic curve of that exposure or revelation of the method has increased over the last 5, 10, 15 years, the zombification of the masses to follow the rules, to agree to take the jab, to allow that artificial cutting into their genetics, which has happened many times in many other resets and loops and harvesting and all the rest of it. We can just see it more and more of people because we're at the bifurcation. We're already well into it. People are either totally going into the hive mind, the transhumanistic reset, harvest, or whatever, or people are waking up and they're disattaching from all of that. So, but in our experience, my experience and all of my associates over the last 30 years, encountering that rogue nature at every level, from the janitor to the clerk at the window to the judge to, you know, has been astounding to watch him just completely walk over the law. So I'm getting back to the answer to your question, which is that nothing that I've done up to this point is absolutely complete because I knew as I learned and really integrated this over the last 10 years or so, that there were certain key steps that I was not going to be able to do until there was a fundamental shift in the quantum whole of the system that would enable us to truly stand as the law and know how to set down, if you will, the rogue elements of whether judicial, tax-wise, taxation. And I started getting a sense of that and capacity to do that in the experience that I just described with dealing with the IRS 8 and 10 years ago. It has definitely increased in terms of awareness and integration. So to answer your question, I do know the steps to take to do what you've just asked about. I haven't taken all those steps yet. The access of the private side of the accounts through all of the numbering system. There's a numbering system for every security. In North America, it's called the QSIP system. Every court case has a QSIP number and everything else that happens. These are security tracking systems. And there's international numbers called ISIN numbers, International Security Identification Number. And so those are all held in the fidelity accounts. Those fidelity accounts are distributed through many corporate entities that use them, use these bonds, and use all of the private side equity to multiply their coffers and their ledgers and everything. Well, all of that is now being broken down. We are about to be able to get to the point where we can walk the steps with SAS correction and actually access all of that and basically liquidate, resolve, settle, and close all of those obligations. But technically, according to the letter of the law, the way I've designed the status correction process is when you do the steps, the 4 primary foundational steps in our process, you have technically offloaded the surety position and the obligation to settle all of those bonds to the public trustees. And we name many public trustees. When we do status correction at the primary level, we name in the US the president, the attorney general, the secretary of the treasury, the commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, and as our trustees to settle and close all of our accounts. Every time any presentment comes to us, we have a methodology to express it as a trust, deposit it with the treasury, We appoint the treasurer as the custodian of our equitable accounts in the treasury, and we compel the trustees, whomever is charging or presenting an offer to contract, we compel them as trustees to settle the accounts, both public and the private bonding. They probably don't do it all, but we create a mechanism by which, or a perimeter that they cannot come at us with attempting to rebond us. So we do technically have a complete settlement, but as far as getting into the nitty gritty of those bonds, I know for a fact that nobody, even advanced people in the law, has been able to do that because it's all been obfuscated. It's all been, misdirected and blockaded. There are a few people that I met in not the 90s, but the 2000s and the two teens that actually got to a very advanced level in terms of doing these processes. But once it got to a certain level, they were definitely visited. They were visited by special treasury agents or other high-level agents in the agencies or so forth. And they were sat down, and I've talked to a number of them in years past. They were sat down and they were essentially told, very good, you figured it out. You're one in 20 million, a handful. But here's the thing. We will not let you screw around with our inventory. Inventory equals the bonded persons, the people. If you even attempt to show others to do what you have figured out, you will not only lose everything you have gained, but you will be essentially locked away for the rest of your existence. Okay. So we're going to let you perfect this. You right there. You can, the last steps, go ahead and perfect it, but take this seriously that if you attempt to teach us or distribute it or guide anybody else, that is the consequence. So I knew that going back 15 to 20 years ago, and I could have followed that path. But if I followed that path, I would not have been either following my heart, my spirit, the mission that I took upon myself coming into this lifetime to create a system of education and guidance. And, where we're at now, what I've talked about in this conversation with you, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And so that was abhorrent to my being and my spirit. I was not here to just gain for myself. If I was, Andrew and I would have lived a very luxurious, very, rich life, but we would have been spiritually miserable. So we took the harder path. We paid a lot of consequences for that in terms of all of the attacks we've had to go through, all of the undermining and so forth. But it has honed our insight, perfected our capacity, and refined my capacity to build what we have built, which right now is really just birthing. It's really ready for much larger influx of members and so forth, because we've gone through lots of purging and cleansing.
Yeah, and like I also took a very challenging path this life, so I know what you mean. And but really we are here for the following of our true purpose. And so we know that whatever those challenges are, there's still grace given, there's still support given, we're not abandoned on the difficult journey. And but you brought up a lot of things that are on my mind, which is about, like, we're talking law, and it's very demure of us, and very respectful, but we're talking dealing with goons who break their own law, or they
Yeah.
suffer various consequences to doing so, or will risk that, or will risk exposing themselves to get rid of someone or whatever. Like, my issue with AI coming on the front and everything, right? Those clerks that we have their faces right now, are we going to in the future? Are we going to just be dealing with an AI interface? Or, like, it's getting that point where you got to get the mark of the beast or you're out anyway. So Like, where's that all heading? Are we even going to be at paperwork level, or it's just going to be like, shooting down a drone that's coming for you kind of thing? Because I don't know if we have law of the land. Do we still have law of the land, is my question, or will we?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
I don't know.
fortunately, we don't have to do this on our own. The way I did, I mean, essentially, I had lots of partners, lots of alliances, associates along the way, but ultimately, we're all on our own in many respects. I mean, when you're face to face with the judge or the taxman or whatever it is, or the mandatory jabber, you're on your own. And so, one level of the answer to that question really is at, what, for lack of a better term, sometimes I like the word, sometimes I don't, but at the quantum level, the whole level of our entirety of our being, that we have to come to the point of knowing who we really are, that we are the most powerful force in all of this world because we are source connected, we are creational beings, and we're aligned with this creational field, which we could call Mother Earth or the Great Mother. And she, in larger context, is interconnected with all of creation and so forth. We have that power. We have denied that power. We have subjugated or abnegated ourselves to an externalization of an external power that's largely been constructed as church and state. So there's the fear of religion, the fear of God, or, retribution, or all those kind of things. And or there's the secular side of it, which is the fear of the state through all of its actors and agents and all the rest of it, all of whom, not all of whom, can't say that, but many chose the path of compliance and rejecting any sense of humanity with other beings and just looking at being individuals as statistics or objects. You have to follow the rules. If I don't make you to follow the rules, I'm going to lose my job. If I lose my job, I can't take care of myself or my family, so I'm choosing me over you. That's divide and conquer. That's, the rule of the game. Spiritually, we've all gone through stuff. You said you're 51, so probably for at least 48 or 49 of those 51 years, you have been seeking your spiritual mastery and your maturity. And that's really what the focus ultimately of who and what we are has to be. Because when we stand as that, and the law process, the monetary process, is just essentially ultimately a mirroring of our own inner process. That's why we call it freedom absolute, because the absoluteness is you could be, like I said earlier, monetarily not in debt, but you're still in bondage. You're still in fear. You're still entangled in many, many things. So we're all in the process of disentangling, of transmuting, transforming, resolving all of that. That is in a parabolic exponential curve at this point it's in inverse ratio. The more we expand exponentially, the more the matrix implodes, because then that gets into the primary intent of who we are as real beings of creational connection and capacity, because we don't look at anything outside of our own responsibility. This is our point of view. Everything is our responsibility. The condition of this reality at this time, all of the past circumstances, all the almost infinite loops and resets and everything, all of the genetic manipulation, all the rape and pillaging of the Anunnaki and these other types of races and beings, everything that we've all studied and looked at, our own personal karmic entanglements. If we take full and absolute responsibility that we created those, we designed them, then our position in all of this shifts. And that shifted position is that we did it by purpose and intent. So then the inner work is all about understanding what that purpose and intent is. If you find yourself in a courtroom or entangled with a rogue actor or whatever, what is the purpose? What is the entanglement? How did I create a karmic loop with this being or this political or legal construct or whatever it is, so that I would remember who I am and remember how powerful I am to transmute it and transform it so that it ultimately resolves. There is no contractual nexus anymore, and it literally dissolves. And when I say this, I'm speaking from significant experience in my life and my life with Andrea and the work we've done for 33 years. We've gone through all of this, and I'm sure you have too. He said that you've had a lot of, which I know, because I know a bit about you. You've gone through all the shit, but you come up every time, and you come up more, a little bit more powerful, more clear, more capable, and all the rest of it. Well, we've all been doing this in the thousands and probably the millions of people around this world. What we are doing is we are withdrawing our consent from being entrained by parasitical attachment through all these contracts and entanglements to running the movie of the Matrix. As we have done that over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the Matrix is imploding on itself. So the answer to your question is they have very little power or capacity left. And we can see that in the outer picturing of it. There's, 3 million people marched in London last weekend or sometime in last week. I saw a video of Germany, millions of people, Australia, everywhere. So, in their attempt to do the final lockdown, to do the pandemic, the jab, and all of that, that the world, a minor part of the world, because the majority went with it, but it doesn't take a majority. It takes, because each one of our standing capacity as a real living being is multiplied by thousands or millions. So the sleeping masses did what they did over the last 5 years, last 50 and 500 years. But we have opened up and we have embodied who we are, and we're taking back this creation, which we actually originally created. They didn't create. They just veiled us in thinking that they were the gods, they were the kings and queens, and that they own this realm. They don't. They own a false narrative that doesn't actually exist, that we've only taken on the clothing of the realm, as we call it, all the karma and the entanglements. We took it on because we knew at this point we would wake up to our capacity and completely unveil ourselves progressively and you know cleanse ourselves of the illusions of these narratives and these attachments, and in so doing exponentially implode that which we had consented to before. So this is the power of the status correction process. It's not just legal or monetary or personal freedom per se. It's what will actually be a mirroring reflection as you walk through the law and you walk through the monetary aspect of it to do that transmutation. And as we do it individually and progressively more collectively, it is going to accelerate the exponential implosion of the false narrative, which we can see happening right now. So we will be able to absolutely, go into the core of the system and remove, settle, and resolve all of those bonds. Because the fact is that when we claim the estate, the underlying estate, and we set it up the way we do it in our status correction process, we become the beneficial, the living beneficiary or the beneficial owner, which in equity, in the maxims of equity, says that the beneficiary is the true owner. So when you are fully coherent, consistent with your standing as the true living beneficiary, which is what our status correction process does, then you have the standing as the true owner. You have the control or the directive capacity of that equity. The equity is all of the accounts that they've accrued and built during our lifetime, because they don't just create the bond and then park it somewhere. They trade it. They trade it. They buy, sell, they derivatize it. They create all these funny money Ponzi scheme numbers in the system. When you claim the estate and you set it up properly, that equity sits now in your equitable account, a special deposit account under the custodianship, which is a powerful fiduciary lawful requirement of the treasurer to guard and protect and apply that equity as you as the beneficiary direct it to be applied. So that equity is volumes more than the entirety of all the bonded obligations that you're asking about. So it's already a done deal. And equity is not stuck in linear time. It can go backwards and claim equity. It can go forwards and see equity being done. Because a maximum of equity, another maxim, the primary one is equity sees done that which ought to be done. So when you have the standing as the living beneficiary, and they are only the trustees, in their whole system, trustees, and this goes back to 1066 when they set up the City of London to be the trustees of infant estates. So the entirety of the English law form for over 1,000 years has been to set up Parliament and all the bureaucracy to be only the trustees of infant estates. But when you set your standing, as we do in the status correction process, as the holder of the office of executor, and you do not give any written permission to anybody else in the bureaucracy with inferior claim or standing to administrate your estate, and you have that equity in your account under the system I just described, and you sever you remove the presumption of consent to being an infant. So you're no longer an infant, you're no longer an imbecile, you're no longer a incompetent. But to be not all those things, you must be educated. So hence the education. But once you no longer are that, and they can no longer foist that presumption on you, well, you consented, and everything in our records show that you're an infant estate. We have the authority to administer that estate. When you take that away from them, you have the power of your living estate. And hence, equity sees done what ought to be done. So they can't come attach you. They can't come say, well, we have these hidden bonds and blah, blah, blah. You are free. The other aspect of it that we do in the master law class is set up a new estate and understand how the law works to hold your creation, your manifested equity in the form of property and valuables and stuff like that. Because we were all set up to be destitute, to go into Klaus Schwab's reset, you'll own nothing, you'll be happy, which of course you won't be. But that in this transitional phase that we're still in, what I designed with our master law course is how to create a true private estate and how to use that estate essentially as avatars, like in the Matrix movie, to be able to go into the Matrix, create and hold the value that you have created, the value creation that comes from your equitable standing in your true being as your source connected greater capacity.
Very powerful. I wanted to just talk about like court, like the whole idea of what that even means, like
Yeah.
like a definition of court. But when practically speaking, because I'm very focused on like, we're taking actions to an end point in a practical way. This isn't simply languaging or ideologies. We're getting somewhere with this, you know. And the court of the people, right? How would court of people, once we've sort of removed ourselves from this situation that we find ourselves in, being basically sureties, now how do we operate? Because if we create a court, then how can that work practically for, say, like, how do we resolve disputes and enforce agreements, reasonably? Do we need to then like create police force? Are we just going to make another mini system or
Reproduce the matrix. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's a very good question and a very big answer. So the best thing that we should do now, because we've gone getting close to 2 hours, is just I'll give a broad synopsis of the answer to the question, and then that would be a good stopping point, and then we could, leave off till the next time we can go into the detail.
Okay.
Everything is a mirror, as I said. Okay. We are the true law. Okay. They are only you know, what's the right word? The
Interlopers. They're like,
Interlopers,
yeah.
that's a good one. I was looking for something else. But basically, the false constructors of a false reality that mirrors the true template of living creation. We are living beings as integral parts of living creation. And we refer to that as sovereign integrity, where we do use the word sovereign. The capacity to direct and manifest our sovereign free will as directive principle and stand in our whole being, the masculine principle as directive will, and the feminine principle as regenerative, always ever renewing life and life force as a whole being. We are truly the law as we re-embody our universal standing in alignment with universal principles. So, in their system that's based on thousands of years of esoterica and symbology and all of that, and religion, especially in the Masonic system and the bloodlines and the secret societies, they basically set up a fundamental system that everything pivots off of, which is the two pillars and the arch. The two pillars represent the law or the line of the priest, which is the law, the line of the king, which is the standing or supposed descent of kingship from the gods, to be the only one, the crown to claim the land. So what we're doing is taking it back into ourselves. PanTerra was set up as a private society with its own jurisdiction that has withstood every attempt to take it down or undermine it for 30 years. So we evolved the court as a court of record system. And it's not a court in the way that the public system is. You can't bring a court case and sue your neighbor because he ran over your petunias or anything like that. This gives into understanding how the common law really works. What is a court of record? There are many people, when we talked before starting the recording, you talked about so much confusion out there and people are grasping at straws and looking for answers. Well, one of the biggest misapplied terms and the misdirection that many people are being confused by is this thing about common law. Well, common law gets back to the Magna Carta. Who actually brought the Magna Carta forward? It was the barons. They were under oaths of fealty as under grants of land made patent by the sovereign, by the king, and they were forcing the king to sign the Magna Carta to give them some standing and substance in the king's court. You know, right to jury by one's peers. Well, peers came from peerage. That means you had to have a landed title to actually be a peer within a jury of peers. So people have been led astray with all these mirroring of terms and so forth. But what evolved from the Magna Carta through the centuries, eventually into, what I talked about, the Holy Roman Empire and the German principalities, and how those principalities ended up in London, they ended up in Madrid, they ended up in Latin America, and all of that. But the common law is the law of the land. But if you don't have standing on the land, as we've talked about this whole conversation, you don't have the law. You can't assert common law. So there's a thing called a court of record. By definition, of court of record is a court pursuant to the common law. So, and a court of record has 4 or 5 primary components that must be met. And in the court of record, the moving party is considered the sovereign. This goes back to the king's court. The king was the sovereign. The king could create the law. The king could say, if I catch you wearing a pink shirt on Thursday, I'm going to cut your head off. That was absolute sovereign law. What the court of record establishes that the peers or the barons, the landed titled living beneficiaries or the sestakes, as they're titled or defined, through the Magna Carta and going forward, can bring a court of record into the king's court to challenge the authority of the king to make absolute tyrannical law. So then a court of record would adjudicate by a jury of peers because it's a trial by jury. It's not a jury trial because in this bastardized system. People say, well, I want a jury trial. Well, a jury trial just means it's a trial that's being directed by the judge or the magistrate that has a jury sitting over there. You know, I could say, I want an office of desks. Well, fine, I'm in an office and it has some desks in it. Doesn't mean the desks control the direction of what I do on them or the office. It just means that the office has desks. So this is where the common law emerged from the Magna Carta, evolving into the court of record, and how that the trial by jury empowered the jury to decide both in terms of law and the facts of the case. So if the king said, I caught Joe with a pink shirt on a Thursday, I'm going to bring him to my court and I'm going to find him guilty and cut his head off. Well, you bring a counterclaim through a court of record and you set up your court and you bring that claim against the king. You empower a jury of your peers, and the jury in the trial proceeds, and basically the jury says it's an unconscionable law. Okay, so they nullify the law and there's no case, and Joe walks away free. And he wears his pink shirt every Thursday just to enjoy it. Okay, that's what common law is about. Okay, but you have to be a qualified elector. You have to have standing on the land. You have to essentially be a prince elector in the Holy Roman Empire to have that standing. Okay, the men withstanding from 1776 onward for a while, as I said, that one court case that said that sovereignty devolved to the people. The people were defined by free white men with land who were qualified electors with standing on the land, which was the equivalent of a prince elector in Europe. Okay, so that's where the common law is. That's where the English common law basically evolved and all of that. There is no such thing anymore in all the Commonwealth or the United States of common law. Okay. It didn't go away, but it's heavily overlaid with all the other stuff, corporate and financial and monetized debt and all the rest of it. So it's a matter of what did we do in PanTerra? Well, we established what I first called the court of the ecclesia, because in the United States, besides the absolute right of obligations of contracts that state cannot impair, we have the right of expression, free expression of religion. So essentially, following the law, understanding how ecclesiastical law controls everything in this country and the world, I established PanTerra from the get-go as an ecclesiastical sovereign body politic. And the reason I did that is because I met an individual who had done something similar. I'm not going to go into that history, but he actually withstood the onslaught of the entire world system by perfecting a form of an ecclesiastical sovereign body politic. So I modeled PanTerra after that. I use certain key words and phrases to establish that we are, in effect, in spiritual terms, a true church of the people. Of the people means an ecclesia, because the word ecclesia means the body of the congregation, or in sovereignty terms, the body politic of the ecclesia. That's how we founded and built PanTerra for about 20 years. At a certain point here, going through different layers of our process, 3 years ago, we decided that we were going to change the name from PanTerra de Oro to PanTerraVida, and we are going to change the court of the ecclesia to the court of the people, because at that point we had evolved our standing and our capacity and cognizance within the world system as the law of the people, because we are ultimately the true law in all of creation. But common law is also based on certain principles. Do unto others as you would have do unto them, unto yourself, have them do unto you. Let me say it again. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love thy neighbor as thyself. You know, be equitable and fair. Honor your contracts, honor your relationships, all of those universal principles. And so this is what we've been embodying and perfecting as our law form. So the more people come in and substantiate themselves who are working on their own process and being part of this will expand the substance or the substantiation of embodying the people as the true grounding of the law, which will also exponentially continue the implosion of the matrix and its false narrative, its false law form. And there's a lot of detail about that. A lot of that is sort of intangible for people to put their minds and their hearts around, but I've seen it work many, many times. I've seen it be implemented by myself and others many times. And everything is shifting in this reality with everything going on the macro scale with the military alliance and what's happening with all the exposure of things. The matrix is in an accelerated level of exposure, and by exposure, their collapse. And so as it collapses, we expand our embodiment. The other aspect of this is the decentralization of it. So what we have built in PanTerra are practical tools for all of this, but also templates and models. Because when people do the master law course, they follow the same model or template and they create their own society, their own private estate. That estate can be for two beings, two partners, or a worldwide project or organization or anything in between. It doesn't mean that we're recreating the hierarchy. Doesn't mean that Ken, as the overseer of PanTerra, controls everything, controls everybody. That's only projection of people's entanglement with the matrix. What we have created in its pure form and its manifested form is a true new model that is not just a reiteration of the same old, same old. Okay. But you have to be educated to learn and understand how that really is done, what we have done, and where we're going with it. The ultimate vision is that we have hundreds and thousands of people who are educated, empowered, who sever the attachments to the matrix and the bonding and create their own estates, their own societies, and learn how to direct and use them for manifesting your true being, your spiritual path, your mission, your organization, your project, your family, whatever it is, so that we actually are taking back control of this creational realm field that we created in the first place. Because they are interlopers, they are parasites who came in and attached to us what they had done many times before in other worlds. And this is the line in the sand. We came here to disintegrate or dissolve this parasitical infestation in a large part of creation. Because if we didn't do this and didn't do it now, it would, oh, okay, it would have destroyed everything because a parasite ultimately does kill its host. So that's why everybody's focusing on their own health and detoxing the parasite.
Yeah, show your website as you were talking there as we kind of wrap things up, how much information is here that people can, you know, dive in, learn more, get their feet wet if they, still are new to Ken's work and have access to everything up top here. You have a whole portal. This is the declaration I do recommend reading as well. And is this where you can sign up for the course itself on this
Well,
website?
go Well, yeah, there's a place here. We're just shifting it over because our original website was Gemstone University. Then we
Mm-hmm.
created Gem.University. And if you go to the right on the menus at the top, it says be a member.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you can go there
Mm-hmm.
and then you could follow the steps to being a member, to signing up. And there's three levels. There's Gem member, Pro member, full participation member. But also let's go to Gem.University. Yeah. So
Gorgeous.
so on the left you have two things, join, Patreon and Substack. If you go onto either one of those, yeah, you're going to go to Substack there. So you can join our Substack. When you do that, then you get a welcome package, and that package gives you the ability to enter in, take the few steps to enter in and become a full member, not the full participation member, but at the GEM level, which is general education member. And you have access to all of the beginning education in GEM University.
Mhm.
So you can do that with either Substack or Patreon. And we have packages that we send out, and it covers all of that.
Excellent. Looks
So,
wonderful. Yeah.
and then there's some other interviews and videos I can see right up the top on the right. Yeah, scroll down a little bit.
Podcasts, recent posts.
Yeah, see right there, stop right there and see that red border on the bottom with me and the woman on the left with glasses. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's Nina. And I just did the third interview with her, and I go into a lot of more detail, the two pillars and all kinds of detail. And what I've been doing in the last 8 months since we started Freedom Absolute is I'm doing the interviews with you, and I'm doing interviews with Nina, a Canadian woman named Lauda, and I'm building a comprehensive, full system, foundational and comprehensive view of all these details. This was a really good interview because you wanted to go into the practicalities and talk about what we've now talked about, which I hadn't done before in the previous one. So they're all complementary. In fact, the last one I did with Anina was all about the two pillars and how the line of the priest and the line of the king, how that was externalized because we are the law. We don't need priests to tell us the law or tell us how to find God or any of that stuff.
We're
Let's
cutting
see,
out the middleman, aren't we?
cutting out the middleman,
Yeah.
intercessionary, and we don't need the king to say he owns the land or the queen or whatever, that he owns the land, or the pope who's claimed he owns all the land, the flesh and the souls. We're removing all of them. Okay. We are the land. We are the substance of the land. We are in synchronous relationship with the living being known as Mother Earth, and we are creation. So we are working again to rebuild, to heal this world by healing ourselves, healing our standing, all of these things, so that we basically become the true stewards, not the sovereigns. Sovereign is a hierarchical concept. Basically, is, Sav, which is solo or singular, reign. They reign over us hierarchically. So we really don't want to be a sovereign. We want to be stewards of the land, stewards of the wealth that we create. That's a multi-generational legacy to pass on the knowledge, the wisdom of life to our children and to their children and so forth. That's what's happening in this reality right now. And that's what Pantera is all about. So actually go back to your screen share one more last thing. We'll show them. We're going to go to another website, ptvcourt.org.
PTV Court.
Okay. You see the menus. So you can go to foundational documents. You can see a lot of the historical documents. You can go to the combined courts. And in the combined courts, it breaks down how I design the whole court system and utilize the best of the common law court, the
Mm.
court record, the maxims of equity, how all of this are the best of the key pieces of the world system that we've integrated in our court and our law form. And we have public notices. This is very embryonic at this point. We haven't had the resources or the people yet to build this, but we're going to have a full public record system as well as the private record system for full interaction with the world system and all of that in the notices. So if you open up go to foundational documents. So the second to the last thing on the right, private instrument of establishment and articles of creation for the court of the people.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that one. Okay. So people can go there. This document, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the reader, the document.
Okay.
Yeah, right there. So you can download the PDF or you can read it in this reader. So people can go to ptv.org, ptvcourt.org, and they go through it and they can read our historical foundational documents. You can go to the articles here. Reading this document will be a very significant education to see how we have pulled all the best elements of the law forms, equity, common law, courts of record, commercial law, and so forth. We have the authority to build our own law form. We can pull from everything that's been created over the last 1,000 years and use the most ideal, the most beneficial components and build our own law form. Okay. That's what every other law form does. And all the ones you're familiar with. They can adopt a law from somebody else, another jurisdiction. They can adopt it in whole. They can adopt it in part. That's what we've done. But what we're doing, what we have done at the foundational level with this document and so forth, is to purge out all of the hooks, all of the backdoors, all of the crap that they built in for control, dominance, extraction of our life force, bonding, all the rest of it. That's our power. That's who we are. That's what we're capable of doing. And then people will say, well, how do you make this real? How do you make the public system comply with that? That's a very big question and a very big answer that we will go to next time. But it's logical, it's lawful, it's very precise. This is what the education is about, and this is what we're here to do. Okay, we're here to take back authority, power, and creational control, but it's not really control. They control. We just express our being and our, creational capacity, our will, purpose, and intent. So this is what PanTerra is about. This is what we've been building. This is where we're at right now. And we would really love to see more people come on and take these steps and make the commitment, because it is a serious commitment. It's not for the idle. It's not for the faint of heart. It really takes persistence, continuity, and hard work. So it's not a 1, 2, 3, sign these 2 pieces of paper, send it to the post office, and you're done. No, this is real work, both inner and outer. So thank you all for watching us. Thank you, Amanda. It's been great, and I really appreciate you. It's been wonderful, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah, thank you. This has been magnificent and very inspiring, and really something for people who want to sink their teeth into something really meaty and valuable. This is right there for you. All the work has been like set up like over all these years for people to be able to digest this and not have to endlessly research and make all the mistakes. We've made all the mistakes now, or maybe not all of
We
them,
did
but
it
most
for
of
you.
them. Yeah.
We
So
did
it's
it
a
for you.
safer way of doing it. And I appreciate that it's so beautifully set for people to dive in and begin learning no matter where they're at. But ideally, I would say the most important aspect are the spiritual aspects coming into something like this, that there is radical self-responsibility in approaching the material and in dealing with, the world at large. If there's still like that kind of fighting spirit of wanting to, conquer or destroy or anything like that, that has to really be dealt with, because I had to deal with that going through equity paperwork. Really, it's just about peacemaking and not about making war. And there's a lot of us and them and black and white thinking. And I think this process would dispel a lot of that anyway. But coming
Yeah.
in, with leadership mindset is really valuable. And those who really want to embrace and embody this type of knowledge and living this way. It's very, very wonderful. So thank you so much, Ken. Thank you for your time today and for explaining things in such a really nice, grounded sense. And next time we'll talk more details and
Or the layers of the onion.
yes, more layers of the onion indeed. So thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm ADV, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks, Amanda. Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Okay, bye bye.